people. We'll just kind of wait for people to trickle in,
Okay.
and then I'll do the official compressed intro.
Sounds good.
So I did not come up with any. James likes to start with a hot topic. Just trying to think if there's anything.
Okay, I got a hot topic. I went to a React JS meetup in Austin. It was at the Expedia office, and they were talking about
That's
GraphQL.
Okay.
And it had been a while since I used GraphQL, and this was kind of like a cursory introduction. And you know, after not using GraphQL for a while, coming back and seeing like the code of just to get a server up and running and just to get the client up and running and utilizing caching, I was like, oh my God, this is so complicated. Why did we do this? Like the caching mechanism is like, no, browser, you have a cache? No, we're not going to use this. You have to write your own cache merge strategies, your own caching strategies. You have to solve that N+1 problem thing. You have to deal with like custom error structures instead of using the standard HTTP response codes. And I just thought like, man, it seems like GraphQL felt like a bad idea for the problem that it solved. Like very heavy-handed. I don't know. That's my hot take. What do y'all think about it?
I have a hot take.
We use GraphQL. Like if the question is GraphQL or like HTTP REST, I'm definitely in the GraphQL camp.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely for me, because the like having a interface definition between the server and the client, having that formal and having that generate bindings, I think is a gigantic time saver over doing the manual. You have to guess at the shape of the query and the data thing. So
totally. And that's like across, like if your server was even in a different code base, you can still generate those types.
Yeah. I like, you know, when I used to be at Google for a long time, and we would use something called, you know, protocol buffers for doing this type of thing. And like, without that interface, like that well-defined interface layer, I feel like stuff gets quite complicated, especially like another big advantage, I think, is something around versioning. It's around it being sort of language agnostic with what's in the backend. So, like I don't have strong opinions that like the GraphQL spec is necessarily the best version of this, but like having some sort of abstraction layer there that you know, makes it well defined what that API is, I feel like it's a big win. That's my rebuttal to that.
Yeah, actually, you know, you make a good point. Like, I really don't have a problem with GraphQL spec. I think it's mostly Apollo that I really dislike. You know what I mean?
So
how
I haven't used Apollo.
Yeah.
So we basically have like a simple Go server that has bindings, and basically we use it. It just basically writes into Postgres for us, but it's a nicer API on top of that.
Yeah. And I think like it all depends on your use case. If you're spinning up a very small application that doesn't have like all this problem of overfetching and stuff, and you have a small data set, it does feel like overkill. But if you're working with like a ton of distributed microservices and you need like a front man API to sit there and kind of send it out and resolve all these complex queries, GraphQL is amazing. But you know, this was presented as like a GraphQL 101. And it was like a deluge of information where I was like, wow.
Wasn't making your life simpler.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, Brad, you should check out Redwood.
Okay. Yeah. Well, they do a good job with all the generators.
Redwood. Yeah, I was going to say Redwood uses GraphQL on their API side, and it does suck. So that's why you have Redwood. It handles all of that stuff for you. When I've worked with GraphQL before Redwood, without Redwood, it feels like a ton of duplicate code because you have to like write your types and then like write your schemas and then like write your what else do you write? Like your resolvers and your queries and your mutations, and you're like, oh my goodness. So the nice thing about Redwood is it does a lot of that connection stuff for you, and then it has generators with the command line tool that will create all that stuff for you. And so it uses that like Rails mentality of configuration over convention or convention over configuration, whatever, to handle all that stuff
Rails
for you.
Convention. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like what? Like this is, you say like, hey, Redwood, this is my model. And it's like, I gotcha. Here's your query hook. Here's your mutation hook. Here's your DB entry, like done. Yeah.
Yeah. So like
that's pretty cool.
You write your schema. It's like a Prisma schema is what it is.
Yeah.
And then you say like, generate my SDL. And then you're like, okay, now I can use GraphQL and I can connect to it through Apollo. And Apollo isn't even gross. I have no idea what's running on the back end, but Apollo isn't even bad the way that they have it set up.
Because you just work with the hooks. You don't see like you didn't have to write the Apollo link or the Apollo cache.
Exactly.
Those
None of that.
2 bits are the hardest parts.
Yeah. No, you don't do any of that stuff. It's beautiful. And Redwood also has a thing called Redwood Cell where you just say, hey, here's my query. And then these are the 4 components that I want to use when you have a success state, an error state, an empty state. And you just define those, and then it will show whatever you want it to based on what the result is. Like you don't have to deal with any of that.
It's handling the hardest bits because like the link, the cache, and the error handling, because it's just like a 3 input state machine. Like I found a bug in the presenter's code and I felt like I was like, oh shit. Right? Because you have to check all 3, right?
Person?
I submitted a pull request against the repo. So but yeah, when you have to check all 3 and you can't just check at the network layer, right? That's tougher. That's just more logic everywhere. But when Redwood abstracts that away, then hey, it feels really easy.
Yep, for sure. Okay, awesome. Let's go ahead and get started. There's a few people that are hanging out with us in the chat. Welcome. We are going to try and do a demo at the end. So since this also gets used in the audio version, we're going to go ahead and start. And that way, if we need to end early, we can just for the demo. That way it makes sense for the audio version of the podcast. So I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. And let me pull up. We have the music intro. So, ooh, bless you.
Oh, that was my wife. Bless you, they say.
They say. Awesome. Okay. Welcome to another episode of Compressed FM, a podcast all about web design and development with a little bit of zest. Today we have Zach Lloyd from Warp. We're super excited. So let's get into it.
Web development and design, who would have guessed? Well, we can do them both, even add a little zest. So turn up the volume, get ready for the best. Let's get it started in this episode of Compress.
I feel like I need to use James. What's up, everybody? My name is Amy Dutton. I am a lead maintainer on the Redwood JS core team. I also have my official co-host, Brad Garapi.
Finally on the books now. Hey, y'all. My name is Brad Garapi, and I'm a front-end developer at Atlassian.
We also have Zach Lloyd, who is the founder of Warp. Welcome, Zach.
Thank you for having me. I've been on a bunch of podcasts, but never one with that cool of a theme song intro. I dig that.
Thank you. Yeah, that is actually James rapping. And the fun story behind that is when we first started talking about doing a podcast together, he's like, I'd like to create a rap intro. And I was like, oh, good. I didn't know him very well at the time. And so I was like, well, we'll just see how this goes. And then it was stellar. Like I was blown away.
Stellar. So, I think that works.
Yeah. But anyways, welcome. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Let's see. Brad, you had a list?
Yeah.
This is why you're here and official.
So Zach, I saw your bio a little bit, and you have like a pretty awesome past history. It looks like a couple really big companies and that you've worked for. So like, tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think I've been pretty fortunate. I've done some interesting stuff. Probably like the biggest like career thing that I've done. I was principal engineer at Google. I was very early on the Google Docs team and ended up running engineering on Google Sheets and then being the lead engineer for the Docs suite, that's probably like my formative engineering experience. And then I've also started a couple companies, one of which is Warp. I am a law school dropout, which is, I think, fairly unusual in the tech industry. I have a philosophy master's degree. I worked as a I worked in a music studio for a while as like a recording assistant. So I don't know. I feel like I was the CTO at Time for a little bit. So I feel like I love that I've gotten fortunate to have like a pretty good variety in my career. It's pretty fun. I think actually having that variety is helpful for a lot of things.
Yeah. One of the things I'm curious about is like, we're at like the senior engineer level right now.
Yep.
What's the real difference at that principal level, and how do you ever reach a position like CTO? Like, what do you do to get there?
So for the principal level thing, there was like I'd say some big aspect of luck in the sense that I was on really just one project at Google. Like I was on Google Docs, and I was lucky enough to get in at the right time, and I got into a leadership position with it very early. And then I guess they liked the work I did, which is, I think that's part of it. I sort of did things that had like, I really think the key thing is like driving impact. It's like the one, like if we don't have a job ladder at Warp right now, but if we did, that would be the one thing that I care about. And, in my time on Google Docs, I did a bunch of like, I had the idea for and implemented and executed on a bunch of like pretty high profile things, basically rewriting the Google Sheets app from scratch to work offline, to have everything work in the browser, to use Canvas, to basically try to fix its performance and make it actually to change the collaboration semantics. And so I think at a place like Google, if you do like semi-high profile projects that you are the driving force behind and you recruit people to work on them, and it's a little bit like founding a thing within Google, that I think that got me a lot of juice on the promotion ladder. But I don't know, I also had a really awesome manager who was very good at like sort of playing the internal politics game at a place like Google, which, for better or worse, I think people at Google are highly incentivized for promotions. And there is a sort of like skill to it, getting who reviews you, who writes your packets. So I think that like I was fortunate to have good managers for that, but I don't know how much that helps. And then the CTO thing, I don't even want to take too much credit for. Like the owner of Time is Mark Benioff, the Salesforce founder, who's also my second cousin. And so maybe there's like, I wouldn't really say like an aspect of like nepotism. I wouldn't go that far.
Sure,
I think
sure.
I'm like qualified as like a technology leader to do that. But like that opportunity was something that I was just fortunate enough to get access to. And that was a cool learning experience for sure.
Yeah. So I think like the common thread there is if you really have an idea and the motivation and moreover, like the freedom in your company to drive it forward, because I think that's a sticking point in a lot of companies. You can have the best ideas, but if management isn't open to engineers' ideas and pitching them and moving them forward, you're just going to kind of be like running on that treadmill.
Yeah, like I was able to push for something that I thought would be impactful for users, which happened to also be like a pretty long, hard project, and they care about that when it comes to promotions. But like, I think ultimately what they should be looking for, and I think that they was like, does this person sort of move the needle on a big product? And I think to get to the level of like a principal engineer or something like that, place like Google, you actually have to like, you have to be the person who is the driving force behind something that has pretty big user impact. And a place like Google, that probably means you're doing something that impacts tens, hundreds of millions of users, which is crazy. Like our startup doesn't work at that scale, but at Google, that's the scale.
Okay, so that's like a pretty good transition. You're like operating at this gigantic scale, and you're like, I'm gonna size down. Like, let me look at the terminal and see what I can do there. Or like, I guess what was your transition after Time? Was Time the last company you worked for?
Yeah, so my story was I left Google. I was a co-founder and CTO at this company called Selfmade, which was very, very different space from developer tools. It was it went through some pivots, but it ended up as like basically a marketing solution for small businesses who wanted to like succeed on places like Instagram, which is, by the way, it's an area I like know nothing about. It was a very interesting learning experience. Then I went to Time, and then a little over 3 years ago, I started Warp. And my sort of like, like the reason I left Google was I really want a different kind of challenge. Like if there's one sort of common thread in my career, it was like, I don't know. I really wanted to force myself to do things that were uncomfortable, that were going to force me to grow. And like, I felt like I had an incredible time at Google, a great run. And there were other interesting things I could do there. But I thought like the way to force myself to grow the most would be to try to succeed outside of like the situation of a big company and try to succeed where there isn't all of that like built-in support and distribution, and like to see how I would do going from 0 to 1 on something that was a little bit more my own idea. And like, the truth is like the 0 to 1 is super, super hard. It's a very different sort of skill set and like demand on you than like succeeding within the world of like your goal is to get a promotion. And so I'm glad I did that, but it's been like a pretty challenging and interesting learning experience for sure.
Okay. So you said you founded Selfmade prior to Warp.
Yep.
I want to hear more about that 0 to 1, because like there's lots of side projects I want to build.
Yeah.
How does that turn into a real company, with real goals and real customers?
I was going to say, even taking that a step back, how do you decide which idea should be the thing that you actually build?
Okay, those are great questions. When I first left Google, I didn't really know. Like I actually had like a photo sharing idea that I wanted to do and worked on kind of as a side project, and that ended up being like folded into Selfmade because it was a big part of it was a photo sharing app. It wasn't until I would say after Selfmade, I came out of that first startup experience being like, I have a much better sense of how I want to pick what I work on. And the things that I was looking for before I started Warp, it was really about like, what's going to be a great fit for me? Where do I think like my particular background and skills and interests are going to be in starting a great company? I wanted to do something that I thought I could work on for a really long time, like having a very long time horizon. I wanted to do something that I thought could have like a very big impact. So like kind of ironically, like I think the best way to start a company is to pick something super big and ambitious. It's more daunting to get off the ground, but it's actually like, if you pick something very small and niche, I think like you will run into a wall more quickly. It's hard to imagine. It's harder to sell people on the vision. It's actually kind of paradoxically harder to get funding for it. Yeah. So I wanted to do something that I thought like had a very big mission. I wanted to do something where actually I experienced the problem. And that really limits things down. So like I am a developer, I'm a knowledge worker, I'm like a consumer, but I want it to be something where I was building a little bit more for myself than I was because at Selfmade, I really was building for someone who was not me. Like I've never tried to grow my brand on Instagram or whatever. So I wanted to pick something that's for me. And then, I thought that I wanted to use my experience. And so like my time at Google Docs was really, I think it gives me a little bit of a leg up in terms of building a productivity app, building something that's collaborative, building something that's hard tech. And so that limited the scope of things I was looking at a lot. And then it made me sort of start paying attention to like, what are the tools and products that I regularly use where I think I could build a much better version, where I'd want to do that, and where I thought there was actually user demand. And like, it wasn't just for me, it was actually something that a lot of people wanted. And so I started looking at the world a little bit more through that lens. I looked at a bunch of different things on the developer side. I looked at a bunch of things on the knowledge worker side, and ended up thinking that the command line, although not an obvious thing to work on, was actually like an area where it's a really bad product that is super widely used, where I felt pretty confident I could build something that was more useful for people. And that, if you build something that's more useful for a lot of people, like I think you can build a business around it. It's actually still a little bit of an open question for Warp, although we're doing great. But that was kind of what led me to this space and how I thought about the idea. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. That's really good. Like niching down like that, I think is good for your interest levels long term.
Yeah.
And solving problems that you're passionate about is also good for your motivation long term.
Yeah. I think build something useful. Like I was at I was at like a investor conference, and Elon Musk was a speaker, and someone sort of asked him like, what do you recommend when starting a company? And like, you know, by some measures, he's the world's best entrepreneur. And he was just like, build something useful, which I think is actually like, I don't know. So you don't have to overthink it. So that's kind of my philosophy right now, is build something useful. And like the way that we get to that is just really trying to focus on what are the problems people have and how can we build something that, you know, helps solve them.
He would also fit into the camp of try and solve big problems by sending people to Mars and self-driving cars.
He's solving bigger problems than we are, just to be clear. Like, you know, our ambition at Warp is to help developers ship better software more quickly, which is, actually think is it's an awesome thing to work on. It's a huge point of leverage for the world. Like every company is just hiring developers, and the more that those developers can do their job without banging their head against the wall and just like focus on building rather than focus on like the arcane other stuff that comes along with it, the better. But yeah, I'm not claiming that we're building spaceships.
But you know, you do pose an interesting like point though, in that I'm sure there's developers at either SpaceX or Twitter or Tesla that are using the terminal to do their job.
100%. That's the beauty of it.
It's like you might not be solving those problems, but you are supporting them in their endeavor.
That's the beauty of it, is that, so the thing we're working on is like, in some ways it's the lowest level tool in the developer tool stack. And it's a thing that's ubiquitous. Every developer uses it. And not only are those companies using the terminal, those companies are using Warp. So we're having, I don't know, if we're saving those developers 10 minutes a day, like we're having some positive impact, which you know, makes me excited.
Okay. So like, let's get into the nuts and bolts of it now, right? Yep. So like you want to build a terminal. Yeah. There is competition in the space. Like I think I remember around the time that like Warp was coming out, there was also stuff like Fig, Hyper. I think there was a couple other like Mac only terminals as well. Were you looking at competition at the time, or you were like, no, I'm just going to build out our vision?
I mean, we definitely like pay attention, but our sort of vision around this was to rethink how the tool should work from first principles.
And you can definitely tell that in the product design. It's not just like I'm going to make a nicer terminal. You're really thinking about what its purpose is in the developer's life cycle, and like expanding upon that.
Yeah, and we try to sort of be like, well, okay, what do the question we ask is like, what do developers do with this? What are the workflows? What are the commands they run? What are the tools they use? What are the type of activities? And if you were to totally free yourself to build the piece of software that would help developers accomplish those things with more delight and less time spent, what would you build? And I don't think you would build the current thing. Like I felt very confident about that. Like you would build a thing where like the mouse works, or you would build a thing where like the terminal understands what your outputs are and can like make it easy to copy paste them. Even like basic stuff like that is like, it should
like JSON should be like formatted or whatever.
It's like I don't understand why you wouldn't do that. Right. Now on the flip side, there are constraints on the innovation from the perspective of like, you have to be backwards compatible, or else I think it's too high of a switching cost for people. So that was like the major constraint was, we want it to be that most developers will be able to open up Warp and use it in place of iTerm or Hyper or the normal terminal or the VS Code terminal with zero friction. Now, we are not 100% there because we made some fundamental changes that are not 100% backwards compatible, and it annoys some of our users. And like it's not a totally friction-free experience, but for 98% of people, it is. And our goal is just like, let's build this thing the way that it should work for developers. And I don't know, I'm very proud of what we built. Like I think people really like it, but there is still a long way to go to make it awesome for everyone.
Okay, so like let's start with talking about some of Warp's like basic features. I think one of the things that's easiest to get excited about is auto completion. That's like an easy win right out of the box. That's my favorite feature. I love it. But like, what else are you going to notice like right out of the box from Warp?
Yeah, you're going to notice, the first thing you're going to notice is that the user experience is very different, especially when it comes to inputting commands and working with terminal outputs. On the input side, you're going to notice that it's a real text editor. So kind of like using VS Code or something to enter your commands. And like, it's a simple thing, but it saves people a lot of time to be able to like click and put the cursor someplace or select and hit delete and have the text be deleted. It's crazy to me that normal terminals don't work like that. There's a little bit of it's not trivial to do that, but you're going to notice that. You're going to notice that there's a lot of stuff that comes out of the box with Warp that you typically have to configure in normal terminal. So you're going to notice that the prompt is set up for you. It's going to show you your Git context. You can actually just like use a UI to configure what the prompt looks like if you want. Like, show me like, you know, my Git 30 files in my home directory or whatever. You don't have to go around and like set up a PS1 variable or anything like that. You can if you want. You're going to notice you get completions, that you get auto suggestion, and that the whole experience of entering commands is really, really easy. You're going to also notice when you run a command that the output of all your commands looks a bit more like what you get in a notebook, in the sense that we have this concept of blocks where when you run a command, we group the command you ran with its output. And that means you can sort of navigate around your terminal command by command. You can copy paste just a command. You can search within one command's output. You can link to a command if you want to send it to people on your team. And so those are the two very obvious, very different, don't exist in any other terminal features that we came out of the gate with. And so that's the first thing people will see for sure.
Oh, I wanna like talk about like that link feature and how it relates to security, right? Because and this will be a great transition to like Warp Drive and things like that. Okay, if you want to target teams or enterprise or big companies, collaboration is super important. So sure, I want to share a link to this command that I ran where there was some error, such and such.
Yeah.
How do you do that and send that data and maybe not make it go over the public internet, right? Because companies will be like, I don't want anything that's in my terminal to be shared anywhere else.
So we are fighting that fight of like
being enterprise ready. That's the big
So we're doing that right now, and so I think you're absolutely right. There's some companies that are like, wait, the terminal is going to be cloud based. Like, what does that mean? You know, our take on this is that the benefits of collaboration outweigh the downsides of having a SaaS-based tool. And what I would say is like, this same fight has been fought like for the last 20 years with every single piece of cloud-based software. It's like companies are like, wait, our company strategy docs are going to be in Google Docs, in Google's cloud, or our designs are going to be in Figma. And eventually, if the value prop of the product from a collaboration standpoint is compelling enough, it will outweigh the security concerns of the company. Now, Terminal, I will say, is a little different because it's a desktop app. And there's a lot of sensitive information that flows through it. And so, you know, as we go to companies, and there's some companies that ban Warp, which I get, but it sucks for us. But it's like, I get why. As we go increasingly to companies, and this is happening right now, we are having to figure out what are the privacy and security controls that companies require for this, and like, how do we make it private? There's a world where we would have to do a sort of VPC deployment, or we would have to do something. We haven't crossed that bridge yet. Like, I don't think it's like necessary yet, but like, we are there. Warp is like a SaaS app, essentially. It's like a hybrid kind of SaaS app. And so first thing is just to prove that there's a bunch of value in this. And I think there is, and then we'll figure out how companies can fit it into their security policies, that type of thing.
For sure.
And by the way, we're doing the normal thing that SaaS companies do. Like, we're getting SOC 2 certified, we're getting pen tests. Like, we take this super seriously. It would be very, very bad for us to have any kind of security incident.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's put it this way. Tons of companies are already hosting their source code
exactly.
in the cloud, and soon all the IDEs are going to be in the cloud too. So it's like, what else are we seeding? You know, that's it.
It's gonna go that way, and so we just have to show the value. I think is the easiest way to make the case for it.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm a fairly beginner Warp user. I love all these introductory features. Like, the next step, I think, is the collaboration story, and which is, I guess, also your business model. You want to talk a little bit about like the steps to monetize Warp, I guess why you chose to go that way versus some other way of monetization, and then what benefits come from that? Yeah,
so the monetization story for us is around the cloud enabled features. I think that's like the easiest story to tell from like there's a value add. It's very differentiated from what's in a normal terminal. So normal terminals don't facilitate collaboration. Normal terminals don't have AI integrations. So like the cloud driven things are what, and like those things all have marginal costs. Whereas like, a piece of desktop software, it's a little bit harder to justify that. Like you can, like places like JetBrains have very good businesses selling licenses to their desktop tools. It's not a crazy business model, but I think for us, the thing we want to lean into is the cloud enabled features. There's two classes of them for us. So one is the AI driven features, which I don't know if you've played with them. They're amazing. They like truly change the way that I use the terminal whenever I'm doing something non-trivial. In Warp, you basically, if you type the pound sign and the input, you go into a mode where as you type, we translate from English into command language. So for instance, if you want to type like some complicated like find command or AWS command, you just type it in English and we give you the command. If you need to do something more complicated, you go into a chat experience, kind of like, ChatGPT or Copilot X, where the AI will interact with what's in your terminal and guide you through doing a complex workflow. So that's one thing that we monetize. We give it away for free for like a smaller number of requests, and then when you hit the limit, you pay. The other thing is collaboration. And so we have one big collaboration feature that we've launched. It's called Warp Drive. And the idea behind Warp Drive is it's a place for you personally to store your terminal stuff. So like, for instance, if you log into Warp on your home computer and then on your work computer, you have all of your same terminal stuff there. And it's a place where you can share it with your teammates. And the first type of thing that you can share with your teammates is what we call a shared workflow. And that you can think of as basically a documented, templated command. Yeah. So we use this on our team all the time for like, there's a set of G-Cloud commands that you need to run if you want to access any kind of production servers or pull logs or connect to a database. They're hard to remember. It's easy. It's much better for onboarding engineers to have this all just like available and searchable in the terminal itself. You don't have to go to like Confluence or GitHub README, or like, it's just there and you can access it as part of your like, basically as part of the completions UI. Whenever you want to do something, you just hit Control-R, search for it, and you can run it. And then our plan is to continue to add value into Warp Drive. And the next thing that's coming there is a sort of notebook format where it really is kind of like, it literally will render markdowns if you want. So it's like, if you've checked out your GitHub repo and you want to open up a markdown, execute it, or if you want to write a markdown and share it with your team and it's about doing some terminal workflow, that's going to be supported natively in the tool. So I'm really excited about that. It's going to be super powerful.
Cool. Okay. Help me compare and contrast like that workflow feature that you were talking about.
Yep.
With something like, okay, we've got this thing at work at Atlassian called the Atlas CLI. It's a CLI that has plugins for like every team and every feature, and all the things are jammed into there because we have like a gazillion microservices, and every microservice has a CLI.
Okay.
And so it rolls up into this one Atlas CLI. And so as you can imagine, it's like stupid complicated.
Yep.
While it does have like help everywhere, it doesn't have like bash completions, right?
Yeah.
So I know a lot of companies, and we were even working on this for the Trello product as well, is like, how do we take these complex commands and make them have auto completions or better guided workflows? one thing that came to mind was like using Inquirer to like guide the user through that thing, but that's not quite autocomplete. You know, can you compare and contrast those solutions?
Yeah. So workflows, you should think of it as like it would be perfect for this, by the way. So it would be like, you basically, if you have a complex command in Atlas, you would save it, okay, and you would document it. You give it a name, you give it a title. You could parameterize it. So, you know, if there were certain things that people needed to change, whether it's like an IP address or like a directory, you could parameterize it, and then you can actually put documentation on the parameters. And so then when someone goes to run it, they basically put in that templated thing. And then what's really nice about our UX is it just like takes you through param by param and guides you through filling it out. And so it's not so much a completion thing. It's almost like a replacement for an alias, but where the alias is shared across your team, the alias has documentation and the alias has parameters. And so the way that we see teams using this is like, if they're heavy Kubernetes users or heavy Docker users or heavy AWS users, and they have all these complex commands that people can't remember or at risk of using incorrectly, we let them store it in Warp Drive. And like, you know, there's a whole bunch of benefits even beyond the documentation, and that like you can see who ran it last. And it's like, if it worked, like you know, we're going to give metadata, like, so that you can track down who wrote it. It stays up to date. It's in the tool and it's searchable when you need it. And so we think for doing any kind of complex things in the CLI, it's like going to be really beneficial.
Yeah. Okay.
And by the way, people at Atlassian actually use it like this.
Yeah. So like to mouth blog this back to make sure I've got it is like, okay.
I want to just show it to you. It would be so much easier.
Yeah. We'll get there. Okay. So like you've got like this really long command, let's say to deploy our service.
Yeah.
So you got like the service name to what region, maybe you need a couple keys and a couple flags.
Yes.
And while that could all be auto-completed, or you could use a prompt mechanism to guide people through it, what you're lacking there is the ability to take one instantiation of that command with like, look, maybe 20 teams are using the exact same command, but they're all doing it differently because their team has a different service name or a different region name or whatever. You can take like one invocation of that command and be like, we always run this, and the only variable we change is this one.
Exactly.
And now be like, this is our deploy to X command. Exactly. And then 100%. People can just do that, and it's shared with your team.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and then another team could do the exact same thing 100%. With their like default parameters.
Yes.
So the command line level stays generic, but the Warp terminal and collaboration level is the thing that each team can save off individually.
Exactly. It's like you write whatever CLI you want with whatever flags you want. And this is like a UI layer for making it much less error prone and easier to use.
Yeah. Sweet. Okay.
I'm going to show you at the end.
Show us at the end.
Yeah.
So, okay. So like you introduced this pricing model. How is it going? Are you seeing a lot of adoption? Do you have any cool companies using it?
We are seeing a whole bunch of adoption of Warp Drive. We have, it's like over 100 active teams on it now, which is pretty cool.
That's great.
It's really neat. We have tens of thousands of these workflows being created. I would say it's like, we launched, and by the way, just to be clear, we launched this like 2 months ago. Okay. And so it's
really good then.
It's really good. And it's a totally new behavior in the terminal is the other thing. It's just like most people's terminals. It's just like a kind of piece of local software that doesn't do this. And so we're really excited to see people investing in setting up Warp to make themselves and their whole team more productive. So the short answer is I'm really excited. And then we have a bunch of stuff coming in here that's going to be really, really continue to add value. Like, for instance, sharing your launch configurations with your team and sharing, making sure that you can share your themes with your team. Like basically anything in Warp that you make is going to be shareable. And the really killer thing, actually, I'm teasing a lot of the roadmap here, but it doesn't really matter. We're doing this is you're going to be able to actually just share the session And so, so you're going to be able, if you want, if you're like onboarding someone, and you want, and like, you're like, type this command, type that command, and you're doing this over Zoom, you're going to be able to just go into the session and natively suggest that they do that. Or even like, if we're figuring out the exact sharing model here, but like, you're going to have real-time sharing in the terminal, which is, I think, going to be amazing for people. So it's just getting cooler.
Have you thought about, don't hate me for asking this question.
Yeah.
Integrating with like VS Code as a plugin? I just think that, awesome. Well, that answers that. I was just going to say, for me, like the case for using the VS Code terminals is like, it's right there. I'm already there. Totally. So, anyways, that's awesome though, that there's some type of integration that makes.
So no, we've thought about it. We've thought of it.
Okay, I hear you.
Thought about it, to answer your question. We would like to do this. This is one of our top 5 user requests. I completely get the value of using the terminal integrated into the code editor. From like, just like to go technical on this for a second, like VS Code is written in web tech. Warp is written in Rust. And we do, it's our whole own rendering thing where we render directly on the GPU. Now, we have a prototype version of Warp that's working using like WebAssembly and WebGL. So that's like the technical path to make this doable. But there's also a whole bunch of product questions on how we do this well, because Warp is really, at least today, it's like architected to be a standalone app, meaning like, just to give you an example, it's like we have our own theme, we have our own command palette, we have our, we have a whole bunch of Chrome around it. And so we would need to figure out an embedded version of Warp that makes sense in the context of VS Code. But I get that people want this, and I think from a distribution standpoint, it would be awesome for us to offer it. It's just, I don't have any kind of timeline around it, but we're working on like being able for us being able to render in the web is kind of the technical table stakes to make this happen.
So I feel like a lot of the terminal stuff that came out a while back, Hyper being the primary example in my eyes, felt slow.
Yes.
Because Hyper was an Electron app, right? So is Rust the thing and leveraging the GPU the thing that makes Warp feel so fast?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And this, I've talked about this other places, but like, with Google Docs, Google Sheets in particular, we were always struggling with performance, and that app still struggles with performance. It's not comparable to Excel. And it's not because the engineers at Google are like worse engineers than the engineers at Microsoft, like not at all. It's that the web platform is very hard to get awesome performance if you're using a JavaScript and DOM-based rendering. And so when we did Warp, we actually prototyped it in Electron, and it was apparent that it was going to have the same types of problems because, like, if you think about terminal rendering, what does it have to be good at? It has to be good at rendering a lot of text very quickly. Like if someone cats a big file, it's like, it's going to render all that text. And that's actually very computationally and rendering intensive. It's like, you have to do all the text layout. You have to position all the glyphs. You got to put all the glyphs on the screen. And so by far the way to get the best performance out of this is to do 2 things. One is to pick a language where you actually have like, it's not a garbage collected language. It's a language. It's, really Rust is systems language. It's really written for performance. And the second thing is to do the rendering yourself, which is like, you don't delegate to something like the DOM. We actually like have code all the way up through the shader level where it sounds very hard, but it's not to underplay it. You give up a bunch by doing this in terms of what you get for free on the web platform, but it does give you better performance. And so that's why we went that route. And so Warp's really fast. It's not, there's some, like, by the way, it's still possible to do both those things and write something that's slow. Like if you put in a slow algorithm someplace in a Rust GPU based app, it's still gonna be slow. And so there's still performance issues in various places in Warp. I don't want to say it's perfect, but if you look at the benchmarks that we publish, like, we're on like par with like Alacrity, which is like another Rust based terminal. And like, it's way faster than something like Hyper, like just like blows Hyper out of the water. It's actually considerably faster on most things than something like iTerm, which even iTerm's Objective-C, but it still is not. It's not really written. It's not written in Rust, and it's not GPU. It's not mostly not GPU accelerated.
Okay, this brings me to an interesting next question. Okay, I know that like Warp's primary use case is on Mac OS, right? And I know like you haven't necessarily made it to all the other platforms, Windows.
We haven't made it to any of them, just to be clear.
Yeah, I think it's Linux as well, right?
We're only on Mac today.
Okay. Yeah. That brings me to my next question. Like everybody in the chat's going to want to know, when are they coming to other platforms? So maybe we stop there. Get that answer. And then I have one last question.
This is in active development. So we have a team right now that's working on Linux, Windows, and the web are the three that we're going to support. In terms of tentative timeline, we're going to have some version of Linux this year, I think, in all likelihood, which I think is huge. Like Linux is our number one requested feature.
Yeah.
I don't want people to 100% hold that to me, but like where we're at with development of Linux is we have actually a version of Warp that compiles and runs on Linux internally, but there's a bunch of stuff to figure out around like packaging, distribution, things like making sure like key bindings work, window management works. Like there's a bunch of features in Warp that are semi-tied to the Mac platform that we have to make sure have reasonable implementations on Linux. But this is an active development. It's coming. Windows, I think, is going to take a little bit longer. Like but Windows is also an active development. That's probably our second most requested feature. And then people aren't asking for web as much, but they're going to want it because web enables a bunch of really cool stuff in the terminal, and that's also coming. So multi-platform was something that we held off on for a while just because we wanted to make sure the app was like awesome on Mac. But now we feel like the app is like good enough and it makes sense for us to distribute on other platforms. So that's coming.
This kind of brings me to my last question and I feel like it's a good one to end on.
Yep.
Why do you think Mac has landed as like the de facto standard for web developers specifically? And why was it your first choice in platform to build Warp on?
So I can answer the second thing. I actually don't know that I can answer the first thing. Like the for us is just like, that's what I've used for a long time. Like I've been in the Mac development ecosystem, and then, you know, I built an iOS app. I've been a Mac user for most of my life. And if it wasn't Mac, it would be like at Google, I was using a lot of Linux, but Mac is really just the platform that I used. And then a lot of these apps that their value prop is around improving the user experience for whatever reason tend to launch first on Mac. And I'm thinking things like Arc or Raycast, or Cron, like things like that are like trying to rethink the user interaction. And so I think Mac tends to attract people who are willing to try those things. And so that's why we started on Mac. You might know better than me why web development has kind of moved towards Mac. Like I don't really know. It's a great question.
I've got a big old custom Windows PC under this desk as well. That I used for my like side development forever.
Okay.
But yeah, I have found that Mac just kind of works better straight out of the box, just as is. And all the apps just go there first. And so it's like, that's another reason why you're just drawn there. You're like,
I mean,
that's where those types of people hang out. So
like the Apple design philosophy is pretty in line with the Warp design philosophy. Like out of the box, it should be simple. It should be fast. It should work well. It should look nice. And so for us, it made sense. It's a pretty obvious place to start. But, you know, if you look at the Stack Overflow developer survey, it's like the combination of like Linux and Windows have more users by far than Mac. So it's like there's, you know, not everyone who's doing development at all, not by a long shot, is on Mac. And then, you know, you mentioned it earlier. I actually feel like the future of development is probably the web, although it's going to take, it just takes a while to get there. And so I don't think we can afford to not build for that platform either.
True. And I think this chat comment totally says it all as well. Because we can test Safari on a Mac, you can't run Safari anywhere else. So that's a really, really good point. Yep.
Yeah.
Amy, what do you think? You want to hit pick some plugs and then move on to this demo?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, that's a great idea. Okay. So for the next section of the episode, we will have our picks and plugs section. This is something that we pick, that we like, and something that we plug, generally something that we've worked on. So Brad, do you have any picks and plugs for us this week?
I have a really weird pick. We just got a roof done today, and I'm gonna pick a shingle. Yeah, because I like the way it looks. It's the Owens Corning Duration Onyx Black shingle, but
you have a specific shingle.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that was just the color we picked, but they put it up and it looks really, really good, and we're really happy with it, and we're happy that it's done.
Plug?
I guess plug is youtube.com/BradGarrepy, my YouTube channel. Yeah.
Zach, Amy, what about you?
Okay. Yeah.
My pick is a kind of bougie thing that I got, which has been kind of game changing in terms of how I sleep. It's called the 8 Sleep. It's like this thing that goes on top of your mattress that has an app that comes with it that lets you control the temperature of your mattress as you sleep, whether you want it hot or cold, and then it like tracks how you slept. Being able to have it cool me down in the summer has been like really game changing. So that's like my pick. I'll plug Warp. People who are Mac users should go check it out. www.warp.dev. It's for individuals. It's totally free. You should, check it out. Send us feedback. Love for you to try it, and then try it with your team too.
Awesome. So I'm going to pick a car trash can. So we recently got the Vancor. The Amazon description says cute leak proof trash can. And I didn't think that I would like it as much as I do because it's a trash can. But this particular trash can, I have a trash bag that just sits in there and I stick all the car trash in there. But you can also take it out and use it as a cooler when you're on the go. So it's actually been really nice just because with kids, we always have trash in the car, and provides a little bit more space than what I was using was a old Kleenex box. So gonna pick.
Oh, okay. I'm sending this right to Gabby. She's gonna want to get one of these.
That's awesome. And then for my plug, I'm going to plug the Redwood JS conference. So if you're watching this online, you can still register. You can go to redwoodjsconf.com. But if the audio version, you should go check out the recorded videos on YouTube. But we will be hanging out in Grants Pass, Oregon, almost exactly a month from now. So looking forward to just a really great conference. Sweet. Well, Zach, thanks again for joining us on the Compressed FM podcast. We appreciate it. If you are listening to the audio version, we would appreciate a rating and review, and that just helps more stellar designers and developers find the podcast. But for now, that's all we've got.
Thanks for having me. This has been awesome.
Sure. Now, if you are on the online stream, I almost don't drop yet because we are going to have a video demo that I would love for you to stick around for. So I think you can just share your screen right within StreamYard.
Okay, let me give this a shot.
Brad, I was struggling to think of a pick and plug and just thought, what was the last thing we bought on Amazon?
No, that's funny. She's just been looking for one of those for the Ford Expedition, because we always use her car and there's always a bunch of stuff in it. So,
well, can you guys see this?
Yeah, we're good. I'll tack this on and then we can get to the demo. But Henry saw it featured on the Today Show. So
okay,
that's how we ended up on that one. Awesome. So this is Warp.
This is Warp. I'll just do like a quick 2 or 3 minute demo of the basics of it. The quick thing to point out, so like I mentioned, it's a fully native Mac app. It's built in Rust. It's very fast. It's GPU accelerated. It's backwards compatible with, and it works with like Bash, Fish, CSH. The big things, I'm going to close some of this other stuff that you'll notice as you use it are the way that input and output work in it are quite different. So this is just describing some of the basics of it. So the outputs, like I mentioned earlier on, are things we call blocks. So this sort of like, it joins the command and its output together into a structure that's kind of like a notebook, and you can kind of move around your terminal on a command by command basis. You also get the ability for anything that you've run to do sort of very simple copy paste of just one command's results. You can, if you have an error, you can go into an AI flow asking how to fix it. You can, this is something I mentioned and we talked about a little bit, you can link to it. So basically you can give it a name, you can get a link, and then you can send this to people. They can open in the browser. This is actually an unlaunched feature that we have, which I think is super cool, which is lets you embed. Like, so if you want to create an embed of a terminal snippet in a website, if you're like building documentation or building a README or something like that, you can do that. On the input side, the big difference is like, I'll just search for a complicated command here. So it actually works like a code editor. So it's like you can click and put the cursor someplace, you can double click and hit delete. And so, in a normal terminal input, if I hit delete here, it would delete the last character in the line, which is not what you want. And then it also, because it's a real editor, you can do things that are sort of arbitrarily complex. Like you can even do, if you want, multiple cursors.
Nice.
We ship
my God, I didn't know that. Yeah, so good. It actually like takes a long time to break that mental model, right? To know that like, oh yeah, this really actually works.
It really works. For the most part, things you can do in like VS Code, you can do here.
Yeah.
We also ship with completions built in. So it's like you don't have to install anything to get completions. And our completions, unlike normal shell completions, actually give you documentation, which is really cool.
How do you bring up that completion menu?
So you hit tab. So it's just like you hit tab. You have a choice actually. So there's a confusion around, will tab accept this auto suggestions or will bring up completions? You can configure this as a user actually. So if you go to settings, I don't know if I think maybe it's in features, you can control how you want tab to work. So typically in a terminal, tab will do completions, but you also, if you want, you can make tab accept your ghosted suggestion, in which case it switches to control space to open this. So this is actually a very tricky thing that causes a lot of user confusion that we've tried to make better.
Control space.
So
if you that's what I feel like I'm used to from VS Code.
So if you want the VS Code behavior, just to show that again, in case other people want that, you go into settings, features, and you change this to be tab accepts auto suggestion. And then if I hit tab here, it will do that.
Yeah.
And then to bring up this, you'll do control space. So if you want the IDE behavior, you can do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. See, this is one that I was like, I use it, but I feel like I get none of the power because I haven't like fully adopted the keyboard shortcuts.
Yeah, and we're trying to make it easier for people to onboard into this. Another really cool thing that we just launched is this ability to edit your prompt. And so you can.
Oh my God, that looks so good. Look at
you can basically do like a drag and drop version of this. And so this was actually a project that we did in our Hack Week. If you want to use the one that's configured through PS1, you can do that. But I personally like using the one that's just like I just drag and drop and then save it. So that's another thing. And then to show a bit of the more advanced stuff. So I mentioned some of the AI stuff. So you can just hit, if you want to get into an AI mode, you just hit pound. And then you could just go like directly into typing. So let's say I want to like, download a file from an AWS bucket. And it does this on the fly. And it gives you, what's really cool is it gives you the command. So AWS S3CP. But even better than that, it parameterizes it into one of these workflows for you. So, and you can just like, you can just like go through, you see how these parameters are set up for you. So you can,
and it shows like the documentation.
It shows the documentation.
As you're doing it.
So you can basically do this. And then this is an example of one of the things I mentioned before. So if I wanted to save this and other people on the team could use it, I could be like, this is like a parameterized AWS download. You hit save, And then this goes into the thing I mentioned earlier, which is warp drive. And so now I have this templated command here. And so
how do you bring it up? Like, is there a keyboard shortcut to like search it and go?
Exactly. So if you hit Control R, which is like our general command search, now I can just start typing download. So I can search for it by the name of it, or I can search for it by AWS. And then it goes right back into the same UI for the parameterized thing. And then the really cool thing that I was talking to you about before is like, well, we have a team set up, so I can just drag this into here. And now anyone on my team has this exact same experience. So, when I was trying to describe these templated commands to you, like these are examples of ones that we all use, where it's like, we have like this complicated G-Cloud command. They're documented, they have parameters. And so for your guys' Atlas CLI, this is what I'm imagining. Someone could easily set this up, save it, and then as people onboard, you get this stuff to be up to date and just easy to execute. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. So personal workflows are included on the free plan. The team stuff is
free up to 5 people. So up to 5
great.
people.
Wow.
So you can just use it as a small team because we want people to try and use it.
Yeah.
Before, like we're not so focused on revenue as we are like we want to build something that's we want to prove that it's useful. So up to 5 people use it together. After that, it's $12 a month, which I think is pretty reasonable. And then you also get higher AI limits with that. And then there's, I'll tease something that's coming, which is not ready yet, but just so you guys can see it, which is the ability to have an actual richer documentation format that lives right in the terminal, where you get documentation, but you also get, the ability to have these like executable things that are in these notebooks. So it's like, and like we plan on making this so it actually takes more advantage of the fact that it's right in the terminal. So it's like you could parameterize it, you could ensure that you're in the right state, you could build dashboards out of this. So this is a thing that's coming that we're just starting to roll out to testers, but it's not live yet. So anyhow, that's my demo. I hope this did this clarify the workflows thing, by the way?
Yeah, I was like, this makes me really want to get into Warp more, because my biggest hurdle was like, oh, how do I get, like, I don't want to have a separate terminal window open because I like the VS Code terminal so much. Yeah. But I'm trying to do this thing where I only focus on one thing at a time, and I'm considering going down to a single monitor because of that, like a single working monitor. Because that way I'm only looking at one thing at a time. Even with the built-in terminal in VS Code, you feel like you're staring at 2 things at once. And if I can break that habit, I'll leverage Warp a whole lot more. I use Warp typically when I'm trying to like work on something and run commands on the side,
Yeah. I mean, I think this is one of our big challenges to adoption is there's a lot of people who like the IDE workflow, but there also are, I mean, we just did this thing that we're going to publish called the State of the CLI. Like there's a huge component of developers whose workflow is just a 2-app thing, who want the full screen CLI thing. Yeah, I mean, the State of the CLI thing is, we did a survey of about 1,500 developers on how they use the command line. And we're working on like a really nice presentation of that shows some of the places that people, like what they use it for, what types of developers use it for what. So it's going to be pretty cool when that comes out. I think, I don't have an exact date, but it's coming.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
State of CSS just released too, by the way.
Oh yeah?
For folks in tune, all that kind of stuff.
That's awesome. Cool.
Well, yeah, this gets me like way more hyped about Warp. That demo, and I'm like a Warp user, that demo still blew me away. And I'm like, damn, I got to get into it more.
It's super powerful. Like it's for people who start to dig in a little more, there's a lot of power. We try to like not clutter the UI with like things reminding people of this. That's because like, I think developers really appreciate just a minimal, let me get my job done terminal, but there is a lot in there for people who want to sort of like make their workflows more productive or reliable.
Kill process running on port, the default starter workflow. I Googled that yesterday. Like, this is so good.
Just hit the hash key and type in anything like that. Like
and I was just thinking, like, there's so many aliases that I've set up that I have to look up but I can't remember how I set them up or what the command is. So that's awesome that you can just search through all those.
The search is way better than an alias. It comes with documentation.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Cool. Okay. Another question. If I use the hash key to do AI.
Yes.
Oh, okay. No, okay. It's actually bringing up workflows.
Correct.
These aren't just like commands that it's telling you. It's actually a workflow.
We translate it into a thing that has documentation and parameters, which makes it even, I think it makes it much nicer. Yeah.
Sick.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay. Today is the day that I change. Okay.
Cool. I'm glad that was helpful.
Converted one.
Yeah. Dude, Zach, I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah,
I also need to talk to my Atlassian coworkers who are using this too. And
there's a lot of
setups.
Yeah. So we're going to try to support them as they use more and more of the team stuff. But yeah, that's cool.
Perfect. Well, thanks to our video friends on Twitch and YouTube that stuck around. We'll end the stream. But thanks for hanging out with us. Same time, same place next week.
Thanks for having me.